Good morning, everyone. My name is Ethan Severson with the Wisconsin Department of Transportation and the Division of Budget and Strategic Initiatives. Thank you very much for registering and attending today for WisDOT's safety-related program funding opportunities webinar. With that, I'd like to kick things off with Deputy Secretary Hammer to provide introduction to this webinar.
Thanks a lot, Ethan. And I just wanted to wish everyone a good morning and thank you all for tuning in early this morning. Really appreciate you joining us today to hear about safety-related program funding opportunities here at Wisconsin DOT. Multimodal transportation safety is the department's top priority, and we must all work together to ensure all modes of travel are both accessible and in good repair. Our transportation system can continue to be improved and made safer using innovative technologies, engineering best practices, enforcement, and education. Many of these improvements require cooperative community partnerships between the state and local governments, and of course, funding. Today, you will hear about two of the department's safety-related federal funding opportunities. First, the Highway Safety Improvement Program, or HISIP, and grant funding from the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Specifically, you will receive information about eligibility requirements, application cycles, and deadlines, as well as match requirements for both of these opportunities. You will also learn about the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, or bill, and resources available to assist with the development of federal discretionary grant applications and safety-related notices of funding opportunities. We hope that you find the information presented today useful, and we thank you for your commitment to safety. And with that, I'm going to turn it back to you, Ethan, and I hope all of you have a great webinar today.
Thank you, Deputy Secretary Hammer. I really appreciate the warm welcome this morning. So what I'd like to go through is a brief agenda for today before we get into the presentations. So as we first had, we had the opening comments from our Deputy Secretary. Up next will be the Highway Safety Improvement Program by Mike Finkenbinder. Following that will be the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration grants managed by WisDOT with Mike Schwendow presenting that information. Then we will have the WisDOT Federal Discretionary Grant Efforts by Jessica Wagner, and then I will conclude today's webinar. Following each presentation, we will have time for questions. Please feel free to post your questions in the chat box. You're able to find that in the top of your Microsoft Teams screen. Questions can also be submitted to the Safety First email box, which is safetyfirst@dot.wi.gov. This webinar will be is being recorded. Our intent is to publish this to our Safety First webpage following today's webinar. First, moving to the Highway Safety Improvement Program with Mike Finkenbinder. Mike Finkenbinder will be giving an overview of the Highway Safety Improvement Program. Mike is a professional engineer who's been with WisDOT for 10 years. He served as the Highway Safety Improvement Program Manager for the last 4, until recently taking a new position as the Major Highway Project Program Manager. With that, Mike, I will let you take it away.
Thanks, Ethan. Yeah, as Ethan said, I was the Highway Safety Improvement Program Manager for the last 4 years until the last couple of weeks, just moved into my new position, but still acting, serving as the Highway Safety Improvement Program Manager until that position is filled. Ethan, are you going to run through the slides or? Okay, thanks. So for the HISIP presentation, I'll give an overview of the program, talk about the funding amounts, program cycle deadlines, give some examples of some typical projects that we see and some other initiatives that we have coming up. I'll talk about what is included in the application as far as what you need to submit if you're going to apply for a project, how we analyze and review those applications, and then programming of the approved projects. Next slide. So the HSIP is the primary purpose is to reduce the number and severity of crashes on all public roads. So all public roads are eligible for this program, and the primary focus is on fatalities and serious injuries, but we do look at all crashes as well. but it's really focused on those higher severity crashes. It's primarily an infrastructure improvement program. So meaning, changing the geometry of the road or some sort of infrastructure to improve safety, as opposed to some behavioral or enforcement type improvements. With the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law, that did introduce some expanded eligibility for some of that non-infrastructure safety improvement type projects, kind of like safe routes to school or something like that. We don't currently have any set up like that, but with BIL, we do have some more opportunity, and that's somewhere where we could take the program in the future, um, if we got to set up some policy and whatnot to help implement that. But it is an option now moving forward. Again, this is a safety program, so the intent is to implement the projects as quick as we can to address a safety issue out there. So projects that can be implemented quickly are given a little bit higher priority. Um, so our program, as we have it set up right now, does include high-risk railroad subprogram, which funds projects on county, rural major, and minor collector roads. Right now, I'll talk a little bit more specifically about high-risk railroads, but right now it's on the county trunk system primarily, um, and I'll get into that in a later slide. Next slide. So funding, this is a reimbursement program and not a grant program. There is a funding share to it. It's 90% federal, 10% the applicant. So, for locals, it's if the local is the applicant for the project, there is a 10% match of the total project cost that you're applying for. Um, any costs over that are also um, the responsibility of the local. Next slide. So we're set up as a 4-year program. Um, we do allow programming of projects out into years 5 and 6 for larger, more complex projects that take a little bit longer for design or have some environmental or real estate concerns that might delay delivery of the project. We do allow those out into years 5 and 6, but we really try and keep things in those first 4 years. Again, because safety is the priority here, so we want to get the projects implemented as quickly as we can. For locals, the applications are due to the region staff every year, twice a year, February 15th and August 15th. So there's 2 cycles each year, and those are the deadlines for the locals. And then the region staff will work with the locals to kind of clean up the application if there's anything that needs to be addressed from that side of things. And then the region submits all the applications to central office a month later, so March 15th or September 15th, and then central office puts all the applications statewide together and gets them ready for the review meeting, which happens in April and October each year. And then we would notify the locals on the status of their application. Right now, we're currently in state fiscal 2024 to 2027. So those are our current program years that we're programming projects into. Next slide. So here's some examples of some typical projects. So for spot projects, meaning a location that's just at a single spot, as opposed to a corridor, which I have listed below, could be a longer stretch of road or whatnot, but a spot would be like a single intersection where you're doing some changing from a 2-way stop to a roundabout or something like that, upgrading signals, left turn lanes, or something of that nature. Other spot examples would be isolated curves, could be vertical, horizontal, improving sight distance, or signs, pavement markings, delineators. Corridor, so we do allow multiple intersections as long as they're similar treatment type and within relatively close proximity. So if you have, let's say, a stretch of 5 intersections and 3 of them need work, you could, and as long as it's a similar type work to each one of those, you could put all of those on one application instead of having 3 separate intersection applications. You could just put them all as one corridor. So that's an example of kind of a corridor of intersections. We do two-way left turn lanes, or another examples, pavement marking or rumble strips, long line along a corridor would also be an example of a corridor application. Next slide. So a couple initiatives that we have going on right now currently, and then maybe looking into the future. So for the local side of things, we have the high risk rural roads. We've been running that for a while. That one's really kind of a more of a top down approach where there's a screening done by the state to look at some of the county trunk highways that have a higher crash rate on them. And then the DOT reaches out to those counties to kind of start that process for high risk rural roads. So we're maintaining that program and also looking to kind of expand beyond just the county trunk highway system potentially. And then we also have some additional screening possibilities that we're working on that are local specific, looking at how can we address safety at local intersections. So we're trying to develop another initiative to implement on that side of things as well. I don't have a lot to share at this point because that's still in development, but just know that we are working to kind of help expand the possibilities for HISP funding on the local side of things. Another thing that I think will lend itself to HISP projects is the Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment, which was required by the Bipartisan Infrastructure Law. And what that is each state has to conduct a VRU, the Vulnerable Road User Safety Assessment, look at crash data, identify areas of high risk, where is there potential high risk for vulnerable road users, and then develop either specific projects or strategies to help mitigate that risk throughout the state. So we're in the process of developing that assessment. That's due this fall to federal highways, and we're hoping that through that assessment, it can lend itself to developing more systemic type projects through HISP. So areas that are identified as high risk through this assessment, hopefully can generate applications for HISP funding then. Next slide. So again, this is the slide where I'll get a little bit more into detail on the high risk rural roads sub-program. I think there are some county representatives out there. And again, as we potentially expand eligibility of this program, it might work its way into other local municipalities. So right now the focus is on local rural major and minor collector corridors. And we do limit that to county trunk highways right now, but there are other local roads that meet that functional classification that we are looking to maybe expand to. It's focused on run off the road crashes. Again, it's fatal and serious injuries, and we look to implement low cost treatments as well, kind of rumble strips, pavement marking, signage, those types of things. So there's an annual review done by WisDOT staff to identify areas, some of those top corridors with crash issues. Then the state reaches out to those counties that those corridors are in, and there's a corridor safety evaluation done, and there's a consultant that goes out and drives the corridor and identifies appropriate countermeasures to help mitigate the potential safety issues that are out there. And once that corridor, once that list of recommendation is completed, we provide that to the county, and they can use that as a basis for funding for HISP. Next slide. So if you go out onto the public DOT's website, there's a banner across the top that says safety. You click on that. HISP is one of the drop downs there. And on the HISP website, there is the application form, the DT 1501. I think right now that form might be from the last cycle. If you're looking to do a HISP application right now, you can go ahead and use that form. We are working to get that updated. We realize it's the older version, but you could still use it for this cycle if you're out there working on one right now. So you need to fill out the DT 1501. That's the HISP application form. You need to include a sketch of the proposed project. What are you planning to do? A general concept sketch. Show collision diagrams of what the safety issue is out there. Provide crash history of the most recent 5-year period. You don't need to provide all the crash reports, but just a summary of the crash reports would be sufficient. Site photos of the existing conditions out there, an itemized cost estimate, and then the last bullet there is the project evaluation factor, PEF. That's something that is included with most all applications, but the local does not have to do that. That's done by WisDOT staff. Next slide. So that project evaluation factor, just a slide here on what that is and kind of let you know, it's used for rating or not rating, but kind of helping determine the benefit of each project. So it's used to compare, it's kind of like a benefit cost analysis. So it estimates the crash reduction potential of proposed improvements and compares them to the project cost over a 10-year period. So what it does, it includes the cost estimate, the crash history and types of crashes, and then it has the proposed improvement, and there's a crash modification factor. So we have the improvement out there, and we have the crashes and what type of crashes they are, and then the type of improvement to address those types of crashes. And there's a value given to the crashes, and then the value of the cost of the project, and it's used to give a benefit cost analysis. Next slide. So programming, as I mentioned before, it's a 90-10 program. We do cap the federal funding at 90% of whatever the approved amount was at time of application. We do add some inflation for out-year projects. Any costs that come in over that cap amount are also charged to the locals then, or on state projects that charged to the state. But we do cap each one of our projects to encourage proper project scoping, accurate estimates, and it just helps to manage the program from a year-to-year basis. We do have the opportunity to increase those caps if through the design process, you have some design modifications that come in that weren't anticipated. As long as you have adequate justification, we do allow cap increases on projects after the original approval. If the change is large enough to where it's a scope change, then that constitutes a new submittal for review by the HISP review committee. Because really, if it's changing the scope, then it's a new project that we have to review. Next slide. We also have a COPE pay requirement. Right now, that's set at 1.9 million. So what that does is let's say you have a larger project, and the first 1.9 million is split at the standard 90-10 cost share. If it's over 1.9 million, then that second 1.9 million is 100% responsibility of the applicant. If it's even larger than that, so larger than 3.8 million, then anything beyond that 3.8 would be 50% HISP, 50% non-HISP, so local funding. What that does is it helps prevent a single or a few large size projects from eating up most of our HISP funding in a given year. So it just helps disperse the funding to multiple locations instead of having one or two large projects take up our program. Next slide. So we do have a little bit more information out there, as I mentioned, on the public website that's linked there. I think these presentations will be available to everyone. So there's the link to that. The application materials are available on that site. Also, you could reach out to your region, to the region staff. Each region has a safety engineer and a HISP coordinator. General program questions can go to the HISP coordinator. They could help you with that and the application, that type of thing. Specific questions about projects or, safety improvement types, that type of thing could be directed toward the region safety engineers. And then as I mentioned previously, if there's statewide or general program questions, those could still come to me. I am serving as the HISP coordinator now until that position gets filled. So I could still answer any of those. Next slide. And then here's the next two slides are just contact information for the HISP coordinators. Each region has HISP coordinator, then the contacts are shown there. Next slide. And then the safety engineers for each region as well. Southwest has two, one in La Crosse, one in Madison.
Perfect. Thank you, Mike.
Yep.
And I know, are there any questions for Mike about the HISP program? Please feel free to put them in the chat or send an email to safetyfirst@dot.wi.gov. In the meantime, while people might be coming with their questions, I see we've gotten a couple about will the slides be available from today's presentation? They will be. We'll post those along with the recording for the webinar. And I do see another question from Pamela Holt about speed limit in a specific state highway that runs through their town. Pamela, we will work with you after this to respond to that question for you. It looks like Matthew has a question. Mike, is the amount of the copay likely to increase based on the current rate of inflation for construction projects?
Yep. So I don't have an update for that now, but maybe just to give you a little perspective, when I started in a position in 4 years ago, and I think the copay amount was like 1.7 million or so at that time, and it is due to be increased here right now. I would imagine probably not for this cycle, just because of where we're at in approaching the deadline, but maybe for the spring cycle, that copay amount would be increased. I don't know what it would be increased to though.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Matthew. Any other questions for Mike about HISP? Okay. Well, if you think of them throughout the conversation, please feel free to continue to put them in the chat. If we don't get to them today, we will respond to you via email or via phone. Up next, we have the NHTSA grants managed by the Wisconsin Department of Transportation's Division of State Patrol. Mike Schwendel will be giving that presentation. Mike has been with the State Patrol as a program policy chief since May of 2019. Prior to that, he worked with the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet as the Assistant Director of the Kentucky Office of Highway Safety. Mike serves on the Governor's Highway Safety Association Board in Federal Relations and Membership Services and Education. With that, Mike, I will turn it over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Ethan. Morning, everybody, and thanks, Mike, for your part of HSIP. My name is Mike Schwendel. I am the Program Policy Chief here at the Bureau of Transportation Safety, or what we refer to as BOTS. So NHTSA grants as an overview. NHTSA funds all the states and territories across the United States, and BIL has provided a increase of approximately 2.3% to all of our programming for over $5 million of funding across the country. These funds come across to the states in three major areas: 402 safety section funds, 405 incentive safety section funds, and Section 1906 racial profiling and demographics. That's more of a data point that we look for in crash and serious injury reports. Next slide, please. So here in Wisconsin, we have the big six. The main funding that we seek to provide for under 402 and 405 section funds is occupant protection. So think click it or ticket or using your seatbelt, traffic safety system information systems, and that is a lot of words. That is the data. everything we do, just like with Mike Finkenbinder's HSIP program area, is data driven. In order to target and address safety concerns across the state, we have to have good data. So we invest heavily into collecting that data, the analysis of it, and to increase our accuracy of time, accessibility, and several other key factors. The next one is impaired driving. That's our Drive Sober, Get Pulled Over program, which will be coming up in the national enforcement campaign here in August. But impaired driving remains one of the highest behavioral areas that claims lives here in the United States and here in Wisconsin. Next would be speeding, and that is a year-round program. Speeds, as we've seen since the COVID pandemic, have increased precipitously. Here in State Patrol, since the pandemic, we've written over 1,000 speeding tickets for over 100 miles an hour, which was completely unheard of before the pandemic. Motorcycle safety is another critical area because they're part of our vulnerable road user program. Motorcyclists are unfortunately every day increasing in crashes here in Wisconsin this year and last year. We see this as a risk to the motoring public. And lastly, non-motorized safety, think bicycles and pedestrians. And this coincides with Mike Finkenbinder's vulnerable road user assessment. These are the folks that don't have access to personal vehicles, or they choose to have active transportation models in their lifestyles. But they are also at the greatest risk because pedestrians and cyclists, no matter the speed, typically have more severe injuries. And with a growing population going to that active transportation plan, it's one of our critical programming areas. Next slide. So here at BOTS, we utilize community maps, which is publicly available on the web, and you can just put in community maps Wisconsin. It should take you right to the website. It is how we take the crash information, analyze it, and turn it back to the counties for targeting of programming. This uses Wisconsin Transportal crash data. We often refer to them as the DT 4000 or MV 4000. The first one, the DT, is what the law enforcement agencies write. Think of your crash report if you've ever been in a crash. An MV 4000 is a personally submitted crash report when the police there's no serious injury or property damage associated other than a vehicle being fender bendered. You self-report that so you can make your claim, one, to your insurance company. Two, it comes to us because it does become a reportable crash in some cases for the state, however, not for the feds. And it helps us target areas of interest. This is where NHTSA programming and federal highways HSIP funding comes into play. Mike's program, if you think of it as hard product, you have the infrastructure, guardrails and things like that. And then we have the soft side, or the human factor, and we address the human factor. So with our funds, we look at the behavioral areas of each of the targeting elements in a crash. So think speed. Was the driver impaired? Did they have their seatbelt on? All those things are reported and collected, and then we analyze that. The BOTS grants are then, what we do is we take all the data annually and we analyze it, and we come up with the top 30 counties. We rank the state and come up with top 30 counties. We specifically are looking for the top 30 with the most crash behavior types based on their history. We also look at underserved and overrepresented populations within those counties as well across the state. And we continue to keep ranking those points of information. And this is all influenced because of our public participation engagement requirement under BIL, utilizing 10 elements from the Justice 40, or what we sometimes refer to as EJ 40. So in those data points, what we're looking at is ages 5 to 17 for teen driving and child protection. Again, that's occupant protection, speed education. Older drivers, 65 plus. people with disability, because that moves into a vulnerable road user because they don't have access to a car in some cases or use mass transit. People of color in those populations, because that is often and historically been proven that they're underserved in programming. So we're working to address that. Poverty level, that goes towards accessibility and how they are using the transportation system or the roadways. Are they cyclists? Are they walkers? Are they using mass transit? Vehicle accessibility and ownership. So we look at the registrations in each county and for those gaps, because that lends into bicycle and pedestrian crashes or vulnerable road users. Non-English speaking or foreign-born persons, because that leads into issues with how we're telling folks how to use the system and how to interact with the roadways and what the laws are. We need to be clear in our messaging and translated to them. And lastly, we do look at tribes as an underserved and overrepresented population here in the state. The Native American population are our first citizens and are often overrepresented in many of the behavioral type areas. So those are our Justice 40 elements that we put on top of the crash information when we make considerations in programming. Next slide. So starting with BIL in 2023, the NHTSA programs has moved into a triennial highway safety program. So what that means is we write a 3-year safety plan, and it's due July 1st annually to NHTSA. This is going to be a first for us, but this is where we write our overall strategies and identify countermeasures that we believe and have been proven to work here in Wisconsin, and to establish safety programs in the counties, municipalities, and smaller communities across the state. On the heels of that, on August 1st, we submit our data-driven plan of activities and programs that we are going to deliver in the fiscal year. So for instance, this year we were writing the 2024 federal fiscal plan. We're getting ready to submit that next week. And those funds will be used for future programming and programming in 2024. Next slide. So when you do an application with our office, you have to use WISE Grants, IGX. This is an electronic grants management system. In order to access that, if you go to the WisDOT homepage to safety, the safety first drop down, enforcement, and then go into agencies, you'll find an identifier for grants. That webpage is getting updated to make grants applications more prominent. So look forward to those changes. Just like with HSIP, the NHTSA grant is a reimbursement program and is on a 80-20 match. Communities that are targeted in Wisconsin have priority selection. So what that means, if we discover you to be in the top 30 counties, the office will directly reach out to the county and municipal agencies within that county that we believe have the best resources and capacity to address the safety concern that we've identified, or they might point us to other partners within the community. But however, all communities have priority with us. It's just a matter of how to sort and at what level of capacity in the behaviors. Everybody is allowed to apply, nonprofits and municipalities and such. We do amend our grant application monthly. So that means we can take on projects throughout the year. It takes approximately 15 to 30 days, depending on if everybody's in place and the size and scope of the project, and if we need to do some regulatory reviews. Grant applications must address a highway safety needs associated in the Strategic Highway Safety Plan or triennial plan, and those both are publicly available on WisDOT's webpage. Next slide, please. During the life of one of our grants, you'll turn in your activity. We will monitor that activity, and then at the end of the fiscal year, we have to report out our successes and failures. So with that, grantees must submit, and it is preferred, a monthly activity report to demonstrate that you are progressing towards the goals and objectives that you established in your grant application. all the claims must have supporting documentation. So if you have receipts for buying equipment, if you're lucky enough to get equipment, law enforcement overtime, folks working on your staff, consumable items that were planned as part of the project, all that has to come into us. We have to reconcile that information, and then twice a year in certain, depending on your risk analysis score, we'll come out and visit with you and sit down and discuss the performance of the plan, the successes and failures, and how we can adjust it. Monitoring is done through grant risk analysis, like I just mentioned. That's determined by our relationship. How long you've worked with safety grants? Do you have experience with federal grants? Have there been precipitous problems over the course of your grants? It's just a matter of us being diligent with the federal funds, because we want to be good stewards and we want to ensure that the money is being used for what it's supposed to be out there for, and not just taken and sat on. An annual report is required by regulation. So at the end of the year, each activity has to report out, did they make their goals and objectives for the year? If not, write a simple story of this is what we couldn't get done. And then we compile all that information and submit it to NHTSA at the end of December annually. And again, if they don't meet their goals and objectives, it's just a simple justification. We understand things change, the climate changes. A big turning point in federal programming was with the civil unrest and the COVID pandemic. Things that we expected to see happen due to traffic not being out the roads, we assumed wrongly that crashes and serious injuries would go down, and however, they increased during that period. Next slide. So here you'll see a map of the state. There's a listing by county. That's the traffic safety commissions. Those are required to be held by Wisconsin statute quarterly. You can find those listed in community maps under TSC resources. You can request data or information from our office at crash data analysis at dot.wi.gov to assist you with developing grant applications or curious questions about what's going on in my community. And the link to the community maps address is right below that on the left. In our office, Valerie Payne is the supervisor of the NHTSA safety programs area. She works with 4 law enforcement liaisons. These are the gentlemen that move across the state, and you see that they're color code. They represent the office at each one of the traffic safety commissions, and they report back to the office developing needs and progress of activities. And they are supported by 2 regional program managers, Mike Panish and Dave Gress in the state. They're the technical assistants into grant application and understand the regs. And on the far right, you'll see a listing of names like Tina Bondrit, Tim, David Doms, and myself. Tina is responsible for programming that involves impaired driving, drugs and alcohol. Tim Deese is responsible for child protection and occupant protection programs. That's our seatbelt guy. David Doms is our vulnerable road user. He's the bike ped and rollers, as we talk about it here in the office. And myself, I'm in charge of the media and predictive analysis projects. Next slide.
Well, great. Thank you, Mike. That was a great presentation. Any questions for Mike? I see we do have one in the chat here. Are the rankings based on total crash numbers or crashes per capita in the county rankings?
Yeah, the county rankings are actually, we call them the 5 blue chips. It looks at total crashes. It looks at total serious injuries and fatalities. It looks at a mix of the population. And then it looks at the vehicle miles traveled, and then the rate of crashes by population. So we take those elements and then they're weighted, and the most weight is actually put on serious injury and injury crashes because there's more data behind them, and then the fatalities. But those percentages are balanced out. And then there's several other elements depending on the behavioral area we're talking about, like impaired driving, how many impaired driving crashes, how many impaired driving citations, the adjudication of OWI by drugs and or alcohol or singular in each county. After that's all weighted and scored, then there's a master list that we balance it again. If you're interested, I'm more than happy to share you a copy of our targeting list, and I can walk you through it.
Thanks, Mike. Another question we received was, what was the name of the law enforcement grant?
It depends on which one you're looking at. We have several. We have 402 funded police traffic services grants. We also have 405B and 405D. 405B grants are what we call seatbelt grants. Those are specifically for law enforcement agencies to do overtime enforcement for occupant protection. The 405D is for law enforcement agencies to do overtime enforcement on impaired driving by drugs and or alcohol.
Great, thank you, Mike. Any other questions for Mike? I see there's one more in there that might be for, as a little bit earlier, so might also be for Mike Finkenbinder, if you don't mind chiming in as well. But is there a minimum project size or like dollar amount for the NHTSA grants or the Mike Finkenbinder, the HISA projects?
For the NHTSA grants, no. There's not one community in this state or the nation that's not untouched from traffic safety issues. So we consider all comers.
Thanks, Mike. Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, for HSIP, there's no minimum project size or dollar amount for HISP either. It is a federally funded program, so all federal funding requirements need to be followed, which sometimes can limit, I guess, the smaller projects aren't as cost effective to be let if it's a small dollar amount and still meet all those federal requirements, but there's no minimum.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you. If you have any other questions, please feel free to type them into the chat. Otherwise, I will bring up our next presenter, which will be Jessica Wagner, and Jessica's going to talk to us about the WisDOT federal discretionary grant efforts. Jessica is the federal program officer with the Division of Budget or Business Management at WisDOT. Jessica is responsible for coordinating WisDOT's BIL federal discretionary grant efforts, as well as partnering with state stakeholders and federal partners. She has managed the development of online resources and tools to aid WisDOT and Wisconsin communities in their federal discretionary grant applications. She holds a bachelor's degree in communication with a minor in economics from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee and a master's degree in business administration from Indiana Wesleyan University. Jessica, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning, and thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and speak more about our federal discretionary grant efforts here at WisDOT and resources that we've put together. You can go to the next slide, please, Ethan. So for the beginning of the presentation, I want to look at the high level, what is BIL? I think most of us are probably very aware, since both Mike and Mike had presented earlier on the influx of funds that have become available. And I want to focus on the discretionary side of BIL, also known as IJA, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And it's important, as you can see here on this pie chart, that we've had an infusion of federal discretionary dollars. And when we talk about discretionary opportunities, I'm sure many of you are aware that those are the very highly competitive opportunities through WisDOT and other federal agencies. And so I just want to point here that you can see in the blue part of the pie chart on the right, that was the previous past transportation funding. And then we can see the increases. So the 5 years will have a $1.2 trillion bill that makes those investments into our nation's infrastructure. Go to the next slide, please. And I just want to focus on the new money that is available. Through IJA, we have the $150 billion worth of new discretionary grant programs across 105 different grant opportunities. So now we have $258 billion available. And you'll see the different modes that we have listed here that I'm sure many are very well aware of. Some major discretionary opportunities that are listed through RAISE, and the current one that's open, MPD CDBG for infra, mega, and rural. And then we also have the rails, we have public transit, port and waterways, electric vehicles, and road safety that will be going a little bit more into what opportunities are available throughout the presentation. Next slide, please. So I want to just start with we have the Bill Guidebook, and the White House has provided through Building a Better America at bill.gov this guidebook that helps to provide the information on not only the competitive, but also the formula programs where the money has been increased through bill. And like it says here, there's a high level explanation of each grant program issued, grouped by each issue area. And I know I heard, earlier conversation about Justice 40 and the focus on Justice 40. And so I want to be able to give a little bit more information and background on Justice 40. Next slide, please. So what is Justice 40 Initiative? USDOT has established a goal that at least 40% of the benefits from USDOT's grants, programs, and initiatives will flow to disadvantaged communities. So you see on the right-hand side of the screen, when the presentation slides are shared, there is a hyperlink to the Justice 40 fact sheet that goes over each of the different areas where this disadvantage that has most impacted communities with climate change, pollution, and environmental hazards is outlined. And at the bottom, I have a hyperlink to USDOT currently has 39. So we saw that there's approximately 105 opportunities. USDOT has 39 covered programs across 5 modes that are going to be focusing on Justice 40 and that initiative. And so this is not an additional opportunity to apply for funds. This is how USDOT is going to look at applications that are submitted for those 39 covered programs and how they are going to make sure they're selecting those applications that will hit that 40% of benefits going to those disadvantaged communities. Next slide, please. So we will come back and I will show you a thing here in the next future, several slides about Justice 40, but I want to start with the resources that WisDOT has developed. So on our WisDOT, so at wisconsindot.gov/bill, we have a overview of the different state programs. So we know Mike Finkenbinder had spoke about HISUP. We have that on the left-hand side of the screen, and then the right-hand side are the discretionary grant opportunities that I will be going into greater detail. As many of you are aware, our local programs here at WisDOT, we would find those on the left-hand side. So the state programs are those in which Wisconsin has received the money through WisDOT. So we've received that either federally funded or state funded, or we see there's also the federally and state funded for the local bridge improvement assistance program. So we have the different money that has come in through increases from bill that we, WisDOT, the local programs, are the ones that are then managing those solicitations. And so their information and contacts can be found here at this webpage. We will then, on the next several slides, talk further about the discretionary opportunities, which once again are those highly competitive nationwide opportunities that WisDOT, we are also an applicant applying for these. So I want to just call your attention here to the bottom of this screen. We have webinars. So today's webinar will soon be posted here after we are done with the recording. And I have 2 others. So most recently at the end of June, I had presented for the ITE Safety Council, where I went over the resources, in essence, what I'm going to be providing information today on. And then also our May 24th local program symposium, where we had several folks throughout WisDOT that had covered a wide breadth of transportation topics. So we have those links available there. And then we'll go to the next slide and we'll see the accordion. Below it is the Wisconsin Investments and Discretionary Awards. So here we have listed, we can see that discretionary funding that Wisconsin has received in these awards are listed by the most recent. So great to see that we are bringing money into the state of Wisconsin through these highly competitive opportunities. We also have the local ones listed as well, not just WisDOT. So as you can see on the right-hand side, we have outlined how much we've received so far through bill via WisDOT, the local communities, and the tribes. And we have the GSA map is another option that has what formula dollars and discretionary dollars have been received. So you can find that at the link above. Next slide, please. So this is the discretionary grant web page. Once again, that was on the main page on the right-hand side. When you click that link, you would come to this site, which is also has a short URL, wisconsindot.gov/discretionary grants, and we have the link at the top of this page. So I wanted just to draw your attention on the left-hand side of the screen is the information that we have outlined. Once again, the highly competitive nationwide opportunities that it's important for folks to understand all of the requirements to apply for one of these opportunities, because I'm sure as many are aware in conversations I've had with local municipalities, these are timely and they are costly to apply for. And so making sure that you have the resources at your fingertips, because as you're going to see in the next several slides of this presentation, there is information on a lot of different websites that I have hoped to try to compile into a one concise document for you. So I want to look at with the summary guide. So we'll see here in the middle. And Ethan, I think if you go to the next slide, please. The summary guide is this document that I've compiled. So there are a lot of different discretionary opportunities available, and this is providing a summary of that information not only through bill, but the Inflation Reduction Act and the Appropriations Act. So the influx of funds and opportunities for us to apply for are listed here. And the one thing I want to point out on this guide is helpful tips for you to look at. You'll see the bottom three bullets, a definition of MPDG, which is the multimodal project discretionary grant that is currently open. They have combined, like I said before, infra, mega, and rural into one notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, that is coming up due August 21st. And then one thing in, really being aware of when applying for these opportunities is FHWA are reimbursement grants. And so it's important for folks to understand that you have to have the money up front. You have to be able to cover the costs, and then they would be reimbursed after they've been incurred. So that's another important point to keep in mind. Justice 40, like I had said, I would be touching on this again. So one additional thing, of those 39 covered programs, I have added a asterisk J40 on the summary guide, so you can see which of those that we have listed on here are of those covered programs. So next slide, please. And this is an example of one of the pages of the summary guide. I have it listed alphabetical by federal agency. You'll see on the left-hand side, that is the link to the opportunity. The NOFO deadline column, the notice of funding opportunity deadline, we have listed when the notice of funding closed, and if it's expected and when it's expected to reopen if we know that information. So for the middle one, for Bridge Investment Program, BIP, we know that FY23 NOFO is expected this summer. The third column, we have listed the FY23 funds that are available. And as I have on the previous slide where it says that the appropriate funds will be updated as they become available and have been appropriated. The fourth column, program description, and then the eligible applicants. And the far right column, the additional links. I hope this is very helpful. And like I said, there's a lot of information available. And so I've provided links when we have them from WisDOT. So grants.gov, you'll see there's a link. We have, if there's a fact sheet from FHWA, if there's FAQs, the bill launchpad and DOT dashboard, I will be going over in further detail in the coming slides. But We also have listed the FY22 awards. So like you'll see for BIP, we have all of those opportunities listed of where awards have been already announced. And then the bottom one for charging and fueling infrastructure, CFI, this is where we know that that is one of the 39 covered programs through WisDOT's Justice 40 initiative, and we have that denoted in the left-hand column. Next slide, please. So on this page, I wanted to bring us back, and before we go to the right-hand side where the how to apply for a discretionary grant, I want to bring your attention to the table on the left-hand side. This is the current list of notice of funding opportunity, NOFO, solicitations, excuse me, that are open. And so we have hyperlinks to that web page, the amount that is available, and once again, that is the amount that is available nationwide that we're all competing for, and the application due date. So hopefully, and if you have any questions about this information, take a look at that summary guide. That should also be a very helpful resource, but my contact information is on the web page as well. So we'll look at the first accordion here, the how to apply for a discretionary grant. On the next slide, please. And here we have the information high level on how to apply. So we wanted to try to put this together on the steps when someone is interested in applying for one of these opportunities and the steps that need to be taken to be able to properly do so. And, I want to just say reviewing the notice of funding opportunity is extremely important as we, WisDOT, have attended debriefs through USDOT and other federal agencies, and in speaking with others, hitting all components of that NOFO are very important, and that your project aligns with that is extremely important as well. Begin the application. So based on the program requirements, if you feel that yours will be a good fit, that would be where you would begin developing the team, who's going to be the grant writer, if it's a construction project and there is a benefit cost analysis that's required, that you begin the process for that. And then as you're working through that, you'll need to have a grants.gov account, and that can take a little bit of time if you have not already had the previous steps taken that need to be addressed. And you will see in the coming slide, there is a list that USDOT has provided to help better explain these steps. And then wait for the debrief afterwards. So you'll see I also have in a future page information on kind of the cadence, the time frame of these grants. And so planning ahead for these is very important so that you're going to hit your project will be completed within the time that the money would then come. So before getting into too much of that, I just want to focus also on our rural and Wisconsin resources. So at the bottom, there are examples and information on how to write grants. WEDEC's Office of Rural Prosperity has some phenomenal resources to help Wisconsin communities in applying. USDOT's routes, they have a toolkit that provides the resources to apply along with the grant process in greater detail. And that is for anybody to use, not just rural communities. And then Wisconsin's Local Technical Assistance Program, LTAP, our Transportation Information Center, TIC at UW, is able to then help with data questions, grant review, and other technical questions as well. Next slide, please. So coming back to the discretionary grant webpage, I want to look then at the second accordion, which are some insights that WisDOT has put together along with an at-a-glance calendar that I was just referring to. Next slide, please. So we'll focus on the left first. The first box that I have outlined is start early. Review the USDOT's discretionary grant preparation checklist for prospective applicants. That is found on USDOT's Navigator website. That has all of the detail of what you need to do to apply for one of these discretionary opportunities. So definitely download that and utilize it. Want to keep in mind that when you're applying for a grant that is not through USDOT, and you're looking at maybe having that be your match for one of WisDOT's local programs, you're going to need to ensure that it meets the requirements and that you're able to use that federal grant funding. So would always be a very good idea to contact WisDOT and speak with us further if you're looking at a grant that is not through USDOT. Like I had said on the other slide, we want to make sure planning ahead. It's a good idea to make sure that if your project's 1 to 2 years prior to construction, that is when to be looking at applying. If you have a project that you know is going to be going to construction in the next 6 months and you plan on applying for the MPDG opportunity that closes August 21st, that would not be enough time. You would have wanted to have applied last year. So keep in mind that a grant agreement can take 6 to 12 months to be executed after a grant award announcement has been made. So what we have done to help try to better understand that cadence and when to apply and when is it the right time is the discretionary grant at a glance calendar on the right hand side of the screen. And I know it's a little difficult to see here, but we do have the links included. And so if we look here, you can see when a NOFO has been released, if there has been an amendment to the NOFO, and then the red star is when the deadline is, and the green dot is when an award announcement has been made. So if we look at, for instance, Safe Streets and Roads for All, which is the third white bar, kind of in the middle of the page, we can see that last year that was about 4.5 months after the award after the deadline to the award announcement. And so then when the announcement comes out and says, congratulations, you've been awarded the discretionary grant that you've applied for, keep in mind that a grant agreement's probably going to take 6 to 12 months after that award date to be executed for work to be able to begin. So that's very important to make sure that you're aware of, because as you see back on the left-hand side under anticipate, the first bullet, grant award funds aren't available to spend until the grant agreement has been executed. So please take a look at these insights and keep those in mind when you are applying. The last thing I will say on the at-a-glance calendar, at the bottom of that calendar, you'll see there are also links to USDOT's key notice of funding opportunity list and FRA's calendar, which also has expected dates if USDOT has provided that to us. Next slide, please. So the last accordion here on the discretionary grant page is the additional resources. So if we go to the next slide, you're going to see that accordion listed out, and I have all of the federal resources that, once again, I've added those links into the summary guide to be able to help. Instead of going to multiple places, you're going to be able to use the summary guide kind of as your one-stop shop. I want to just call your attention to Justice 40 again. So if we look at the fourth bullet on here under federal resources, Justice 40, once again, is an initiative, and it's an initiative to address the decades of underinvestment in disadvantaged communities. We know from the previous slides that 40% of those 39 covered programs are going to go to disadvantaged communities. So USDOT has created the Equitable Transportation Community ETC Explorer tool. And this tool is very helpful because it's going to help to see where there has been underinvestment in transportation and the cumulative burden to the communities. Take a very close look at on the NOFO, what it says and how to address Justice 40, how to address equity, how to address workforce development. It's going to be very important for you to be very competitive in your application to thoroughly cover what the NOFO is asking for. To make it hopefully easier to use the Justice 40 ETC Explorer tool, we have hyperlinked to USDOT's webinar. It's about an hour and it has a detailed explanation of how to use that tool. So I would definitely recommend, if you have not seen that, please do take a look. As I said on the summary guide, I have hyperlinks to the USDOT's discretionary grant dashboard. So that's the second bullet under federal resources. And the last bullet under federal resources is the Build America Center Bill Launchpad tool. I'm going to go through both of those in a little bit greater detail in the next slides. But before we do that, I want to once again point out the FHWA resources, the fact sheets, and there's also a competitive grant funding matrix. It shows the eligible applicants for each of FHWA's discretionary grant opportunities. And then the last section are Wisconsin resources. We once again have the LTAP listed here, along with WEDEC's Office of Rural Prosperity. Next slide, please. So before we get into the discretionary grant dashboard and the bill launchpad, where I have those hyperlinks in the summary guide, I want to take a quick look at the USDOT Navigator. So as you recall, I said that I have that checklist for prospective applicants. That was found here at this website. As you see on the left-hand side, there's 3 categories on the main page. Apply for a DOT grant. The middle one is the find the technical assistance resources, and the third is learn about bill. So the first box is what I have selected that you see on the right-hand side, applying for USDOT grants. Once again, if you have not looked at this, please do. There is a lot of really good information. The overview of the different funding and financing for potential options, that's very good information. They have then that discretionary grant process, which I have outlined before, then a snapshot of the applicants, a list of who has applied. And so this is for grant programs through the Office of the Secretary, OST, and that's helpful to see where others have applied but have not been awarded. And then we have understanding the non-federal match and how to navigate grants.gov. So this is just a snippet of the information that the USDOT Navigator website has. So please do take a look. Next page, please. So the USDOT discretionary grant dashboard, we wanted to focus on safety opportunities and learning more about how to find discretionary opportunities for improving safety in your community. And the DOT dashboard has, as you can see on the left-hand side, you can search all of those opportunities. You can look at keywords, eligible activities, and as you see on the right-hand side, I've provided what those drop-downs are for eligible activities, eligible applicants, and agency and office. There is a plethora of information here. You can then also filter by transportation type, if there's a match waiver, if there's a rural set aside or tribal set aside. And then the status is if that grant is open or if it's closed or archived. So this is another place that's a good starting point when you're interested in applying to having a project and applying for discretionary federal funds. Next slide, please. And this is, once again, a little bit more of a breakdown on that same when we look at the keywords. So you'll see on the left, I have put in keyword safe. When I put in safety, I did not get as many results. So less is more when looking and utilizing this tool and seeing what opportunities are available. I then, on the right-hand side, you'll see that I then did it sorted continued by planning activity. And so we went from having 41 discretionary opportunities down to 5 that there is a safe focus for a planning opportunity. Next slide, please. And this is after on the USDOT dashboard when you click into one of those opportunities. So let's say of those 5, raise was one. You can then click and see they have a nice little in essence, one pager of information, high level overview, when the posted date is, who the eligible applicants are, eligible activities, transportation type, amount available, the grants.gov opportunity number, which once again, I have all of these links in that summary guide, along with the eligible information and the funding information. So if we look at the summary guide that I've developed for RAISE and you click on the DOT dashboard, it would bring you to the page where this information is listed. So once again, my hope is that it's a easy navigation tool to go to. Next slide, please. So Build America Center has developed the Bill Launchpad, and I want to just bring your attention as you see the four boxes at the bottom of the page. They have navigate funding opportunities, plan ahead for your grant application, and the plan ahead is a calendar in essence like my at a glance calendar, but a little bit differently listed. You have to select the opportunity. And then the third one is match your project to successful awards and build partnership in the community forum for the last one. So I want to, on the next couple of slides, look at the navigate the funding opportunities and match your project to successful awards. So go to the next slide, please. And this is that, so when we click the navigate funding opportunities, it brings you to the screen on the left where we have that pie graph. And what I have done is, once again, I typed in a keyword safe. I did less is more and not safety. And I was able to find additional opportunities. And when looking through here, you'll see how much of the percentage, the blue part of the graph, are safety related opportunities. Then on the right, so when we click the Safe Streets and Roads for All funding opportunity, on the right-hand side is where you'll then see that information similar to USDOT's dashboard, additional info that you can find. They've got helpful links, they've got successful applications, all through Bill Launchpad. So this is, once again, another of the hyperlinks that I have on the summary guide for this opportunity. If you clicked on the Bill Launchpad under Safe Streets and Roads for All on the summary guide, it would bring you to the information that you see on the right-hand side of the screen. Next slide, please. Then we'll come back to, so this is the search successful awards. So that third box on the main page of Bill's Launchpad. What I have done is I searched keyword safety, and then I searched Wisconsin. So one thing you can do is you do not have to search keywords. And if you want to search by state, you can then see what we in Wisconsin have been awarded, what discretionary opportunity awards we have received in the state. But I went ahead, like I said, and searched the keyword. So a lot of different opportunities that you can use this search option to find maybe where the type of project you have, where has someone else been awarded a successful award. So this, I think, is a great opportunity when you're trying to determine where would my project maybe fit. This is another tool. Next slide, please. So coming back to our discretionary grant webpage, we have the last section on the webpage is the request a letter of support. So if you are going to be applying for one of USDOT's federal discretionary grants and you are interested in a letter of support from WisDOT, Secretary Thompson, you're able to then click that request letter of support, and we'll go to the next page. And this is the request form that you would then fill out. We ask for the pertinent information about the project, what region that it's located in. Is there someone at WisDOT that you've already been in communication with? What grant program is the request for? We also have our WisDOT funds committed to the project. When do you need the letter of support by? We do ask for at least a 2 weeks ahead advance notice to be able to get that letter to you. And then when you submit the request, we ask that you also provide a draft copy of your application narrative for the grant. And this can be It doesn't have to be all 35 pages of that grant application, but just enough information for us to be able to better understand the project and what your request is. And then also a template letter of support. And on the previous slide, we have a link to an example letter of support to make it easier in what we're requesting and what USDOT is requesting for letters of support. Next slide, please. So I want to just end by the current open NOFOs, Notice of Funding Opportunities. And this is once again the table that I reviewed on the discretionary grant webpage at WisDOT. And the ones that are red have a safety focus. And so this is just a good opportunity. Plan ahead because once again, when these NOFOs come out, we usually expect 2 months to be able to, when it's released to when the announcement, the deadline is due. But we saw with MPDG, that's not the case. We're getting like 7 weeks. So planning ahead, we at WisDOT, we are definitely planning ahead prior to one of these NOFOs coming out. We all have been, I think we can say affectionately, drinking from the fire hose of Bill because there are so many great opportunities and we want to bring as much money into the state of Wisconsin as possible. And so keeping in mind that when a NOFO does open, hopefully you already have an idea of what you're going to do going forward as these resources are becoming more developed. And I hope that we have information on our webpage to be able to help you to be successful in your submissions to these discretionary opportunities. Next slide, please.
Thank you, Jessica, for that great overview of Bill and the resources that WisDOT has put together. Are there any questions for Jessica? And again, feel free to put them into the chat box, or you can send them to safetyfirst@dot.wi.gov. Okay. Again, if you have, I'll move on to kind of close out our webinar today. And before I do that, we wanted to provide some information on other WisDOT funding cycle deadlines that are out there. This is just for your awareness, but the Enhanced Mobility of Seniors and Individuals with Disabilities program that closes on Friday, August 25th. The Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality program that'll close on Friday, September 1st. Similarly with the Surface Transportation program, Urban, Rural, and Local. The Local Bridge Improvement Assistance Program will close on October 27th, and then the Transportation Alternatives Program will also close on October 27th. Thank you for attending today. Again, if you have any questions, today, please feel free to put them in the chat, but elsewise, feel free to send us an email at safetyfirst@dot.wi.gov at any time. If you're looking for more information about the presentations today or other types of questions you may have, please feel free to reach out. And as I mentioned, the webinar was recorded. Our intent is to post it to the Safety First webpage along with these slides for today. Thank you and have a great day.